Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Today, we are joined by Gina Simmonds Schneider, who is a psychotherapist with a very interesting background with the work she has done. She has worked with troubled youths. She has worked with so many different scenarios that are what we consider dangerous. And she's here to talk to us about how her work can help us individually and as a society. And before I go any further, please help me welcome her to the show. Hi, Gina.
Hi, Roberta. It's a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure to host you today. Truly, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show. Please give us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you said, I am a psychotherapist. I'm also author of a book called Frazzle, teaching people how to break free from anxiety, anger, and stress using advanced discoveries in neuropsychology. So, how the brain interacts and how we can improve our well-being. And I also am a corporate trainer and a executive coach. And I coach people in particular on how to manage really difficult relationships, conflicts, and emotions. So it kind of deals with my coaching practice, deals with sort of the hard interpersonal communication issues that people might be struggling with at work, whether it's with a dangerous colleague or a bullying boss or a really difficult work group situation. So those are the kind of consulting and the kind of consulting work that I do.
Yes, speaking of the word dangerous, would you like to tell us a little bit more about how you get started, Conway? Because when I saw your profile, you used to deal with troubled youths as well, which were scenarios that were actually considered dangerous.
Yes, I started out really volunteering on a suicide prevention hotline, and we had a clinic. And we actually, the first dangerous encounter was with a homicidal man chased a woman into our into our clinic, and we hid her, and he trashed the office and threatened everybody, and we called the police, and he had weapons too that he was threatening to use. So that was one of like the first real scary thing, dangerous thing that I was faced with. It all worked out. And a lot of it had to do with the training that we had on how to talk people down off the ledge and how to diffuse really volatile situations. So we had had good training. And I think that was really helpful to me in my entire psychotherapy career to have a lot of suicide. And part of the suicide training is also homicide training,
Mm-hmm.
because what you don't think about really when you think about suicide is that suicide is homicide of the self, right?
Right.
So people have to be also in such despair and also full of the desire to kill someone, and namely themselves, right? So some people are both suicidal and homicidal, but it is a dangerous, very dangerous kind of situation when someone is in that level of despair and desperation. So that training was really helpful. And then from there, I worked with in kids who were teens who were in a youth home for emotionally disturbed youth. And the cottage that I was in, they all happened to be sex offenders, youth sex offenders,
Mm-hmm.
usually teens who had molested younger children or had committed some kind of a sex crime. So our job was really to supervise them in a 24-hour school environment with counseling and ongoing support. was actually, even though we were dealing with teens who had come from extremely troubled environments, most of them had come from um, violent homes themselves,
Mm.
or some type of severe deprivation themselves. And so when they came into this group home situation, it was the first time many of them had responsible adults looking out for them and holding them accountable for behaviors, right? Certain kinds of behaviors. So it was really eye-opening to see someone come in. I remember one young man in particular. He was 15 years old and he was 6 feet tall, this long, lanky, thin boy, but he was a lot taller than myself and most of the other people that worked there.
Mm.
Um, and he had been raised by a drug. His father was like a drug lord, and they drove Rolls Royces and had weapons. And father had positioned his son as his right hand man and bought prostitutes for his 15-year-old son and degraded the mother. The mother was seen as inferior to the son, and um, raised with a lot of drugs, not really much education. And so his parents get arrested and go to prison, and this boy is then put in this 24-hour school or residential treatment program. It was. So when he first came in, he was like a wild animal. He was like Mr. Drug Kingpin in charge of, in charge of everybody. And he was quickly disciplined. And when the children would get out of hand, we had a padded room, and, four big guys would take them to the padded room, and they could freak out in this padded room and not hurt themselves or anyone else.
Mm.
And when they calmed down, then they were allowed, some privileges and allowed back into the cottage. So it was called milieu therapy, where really the environment is the therapeutic. It's a therapeutic environment. So everything about the environment is designed to be therapeutic and to train them to behave in normal society, right? And
Mm.
so I watched him come in as almost like a wild animal. Within 6 months, he was the sweetest, most helpful. He got to be a boy again. He got to be a kid. Um, and he was one of the most helpful and sweet uh, young people in the whole unit. So it was interesting to see how much environment shapes behavior. And so much of the problems that we see behaviorally in society have a lot to do with the environments people find themselves in and the resources or the lack of resources that they have and so forth. So from there, I went into working with incarcerated youth for the probation department. So I ran programs for youth that were in juvenile detention centers and juvenile hall, and they were one of the interesting things is I worked for a while in girls rehab facility, and some of these girls say this is the safest I've ever felt. Being incarcerated,
Mm.
it was the first time they had people looking out for them, where they had 3 regular meals a day. They weren't in fear. They could go to sleep without being afraid that someone might attack them in the middle of the night. So that really woke me up to the fact that there are some children that live with so much insecurity, chaos, violence, that being incarcerated is a better place for them, and it's the first time they've really been treated well. Um, so that was really eye-opening experience. And then from there, I went into private practice and working in other juvenile diversion programs, where we would try to divert uh, youth away from crime and into, educational programs and jobs and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun. very fun work and very successful. We had a program that we developed with the police department, and the police would take these first-time juvenile offenders, and they would and demand that the whole family be involved. And so we came in and educated the family and the teens on what a life of crime looks like. And then we had felons from prison who came out of prison and would talk to the kids about, this is what a life of crime looks like, and you have a choice now. You don't have to go down that pathway. And we did family counseling. And what we found is that the recidivism rate for these offenders started out at, within the first year, 65% would reoffend. But after the program, it went down to 5%. So it was a significant impact in reducing juvenile crime because the family got involved and they had family counseling and they learned different ways of coping. And they were also connected to services that they needed, which helped divert these kids away from crime. So that was very exciting. And then I went into private practice, and we started. We were trained in critical incident stress debriefing, so we would go in after. Like in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of workplace shootings, workplace violence. And we were looking at workplace, trying to find some way of helping this problem. So we ended up doing a lot of debriefings after workplace homicides. So we would go in afterwards and help counsel the people, the survivors, and help them really be able to go back to work, because for many people, work became then a place of fear. So we worked a lot with their employers and employees to help reduce the stress of all of that. And after doing that, we really decided that prevention was much better than going after the fact. So that's why we really stepped up our conflict management program. And so that's why we really look at a lot, when you analyze what happens in a lot of these workplace shootings, you have low-level conflicts that escalated and that were mismanaged. And you may also have people who are in so much desperation that they don't have resources to make other choices, and that becomes the choice they make that, of course, is so harmful. So with the workplace violence prevention, we found that really training managers on how to manage people effectively, how to manage anger, their own anger, and the anger that erupts in the workplace, that we've really seen an increase in people coping better, and fewer of these violent encounters.
Right. It's so sad when you hear the stories about those kids, especially the ones who say prison is actually warmer than home. When you start to look, it truly is. No child should be raised that way in that environment. But when you make also the connection, kids grow up and become the adults who are then in the workplace. If they've been through so much conflict and these environments, that's when you have the grown-ups at work who don't know how to handle conflict.
Exactly. And that's what we do in our anger management, conflict management workshops and trainings, is we will role play with people, and we will take real problems that they're dealing with that cause them stress in the workplace. And then we will teach them different kinds of coping skills and different ways of thinking about those conflicts, so that they feel like they have a broader range of responses, instead of just, you made me mad, I'm going to get mad at you. You're an obstacle to what I want, I'm going to push back. instead of just that kind of reflexive reaction, we teach people how to be reflective and empathetic. And as soon as people can have empathy for the other person's perspective, their ability to negotiate with that person increases dramatically. So even if somebody seems crazy or extreme, if they feel that the person they are yelling at or talking to harshly is empathizing in some way, has
Right.
some sympathy or some interest in their feelings, often there will be this sort of arc, and then the person will calm down and you can start to have a real conversation. And so we teach people techniques and how to do that, both how to manage your own heart rate when you're feeling that stress or fear when someone's mad at you or behaving in a way you think is irrational, and then how to navigate that whole thing, and then get to the point where you can negotiate something that's going to work for you and hopefully be a win-win for both parties.
Certainly, if we could all learn win-win strategies, basically, there'd be so much that we can solve. Because when you think, if a person is attacking you, a lot of the time we always think, I'm just defending myself. Gina's the one who attacked. I gotta attack back.
Exactly.
I gotta protect myself. I have a responsibility to myself. To if she's attacking me, I'm also coming with my own punches, and that's how we are usually with anything. It
Hmm.
might not be physical, but with any disagreement, any miscommunication, that's how we usually. That's our first go-to.
Right. We get defensive and our body ramps up the cortisol, the stress chemicals, and that makes us sort of write a script of now we're in a fight and I have to defend myself. And so that's the story in our head. And so what we teach people is you can have a different story going on in your head. It could be this person is very distressed. I don't have to try to change them. I can try to show that I care, and that might help them feel less distress. Um, we can disagree with what somebody believes is true, and still, if we show caring, that is often the most calming thing. In a way, if we're giving attention to someone without attacking them, we're showing them with our behavior that they matter.
Hmm.
And that's a universal need that all humans have. So we need to feel like we matter, right? That
Hmm.
somebody believes that what we're saying matters. And a lot of times we need that feeling more than even agreement, right? We don't necessarily need people to agree with everything we say, but if they treat us like what we say matters, there's a
So
calming feeling of connection there.
So the validation we seek doesn't come from them agreeing with us, but them making us realize that we matter.
Yeah, that in listening to someone, if you're listening to someone attentively without pushing back or arguing or denying what they're saying, you're treating them as if they matter. And that has a calming effect on us.
Hmm.
So a lot of times people don't want to listen. The thing I see with married couples a lot, because I do a lot of couples therapy, and with couples, you'll often see one person getting very upset about something, and the other person thinks the quickest way to get them to calm down is to explain that what they're upset about is really not that bad. You know,
Mm.
it's like, oh, like maybe they're upset about, oh, all this money got spent. Where did the money go? And the other person is wanting to explain, well, the money went here, 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 and here, and these were all things we agreed to. It just looks shocking right now, and you don't need to worry. And so they think that if they speak to the facts of the argument, that the argument will go by faster. But the actual fact of the matter is if we speak to the emotional need for the person first, not the facts of the argument,
Mm.
the details of the argument, but the you matter part of the argument, then might be something like, oh, it sounds like you're really upset about this. You must be really worried about money right now. What's really bothering you? That must feel terrible. Listening to the person's emotions and showing that person that you care about how they feel first.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they start to feel a little bit calmer, then you can say, well, I just wanted to let you know that we had already talked about these things, and it does look sort of temporarily shocking that we don't have that money now, but these were all planned expenses, so don't worry, we're going to be okay, But if you start with the arguing of the facts,
You're
you're
nullifying what they are feeling at that
the
moment.
and the person who's emotional will escalate because they're not feeling heard. People will say this over and over, you aren't listening, you aren't listening. And they'll repeat themselves. And the other person is going, I'm hearing you, but they're not talking about the emotion. They're talking about the issue. So the emotional need is really the most important thing. If we can attend to the emotional need of the person who's distressed first, we're building rapport, and it often soothes that person enough to be able to hear other facts and other things that might actually help resolve the issue.
So, are you saying that most likely those who come to the workplace and are guilty of workplace violence, usually it's the emotional need of not being heard?
Well, workplace violence, you know, it, it's it's complex, and I don't want to simplify it to just one little fact like that. But what we have seen when we do an sort of a autopsy of what happened leading up to a workplace violence situation, we often find low levels of conflict not properly addressed that escalate over time. We often find that. I'm not saying that's true in 100% of the cases.
Right.
Sometimes workplace violence has to do with domestic violence that has stumbled into the workplace. So someone's spouse is pathologically jealous and goes after the alleged person having an affair with their partner, and they're, you know,
Oh my,
you
yeah.
know, those are things that do happen, where domestic violence can stumble into a workplace. But when you have workplace violence that arises from workplace conflicts, it's often the low level conflicts that aren't properly addressed that escalate. And
Mm.
sometimes what has to be addressed is maybe the person does have some anger management problem, and they could be referred to anger management or counseling, or get some additional support before the argument or the issue escalates and escalates. Sometimes we've seen it where a problem employee will be um, not properly dealt with. Problem employee maybe that people are a little scared of because the person is odd.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have some strange angry responses to things. So they just don't know how to deal with it. So they just don't deal with it. Maybe they pawn that person off to a different department.
Yeah, to get rid of the
And then,
problem. Mm.
yeah, and then that just keeps going and going. And what we recommend is if you really have somebody that's disturbing at work, call in a Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, develop a plan, talk with HR, work with that person and getting them some support and some help, like with their employee assistance program. Work with the parties involved. In other words, show that person what they're whatever their issue is that they do matter to the organization. And that can often go a long ways to preventing somebody from becoming violent. But a lot of times people just want to get back to work and ignore the problem or kick the problem down the road and not really deal with it. So dealing with it is at lower levels of conflict is always better.
It does sound like it's a human reaction to just postpone it or say, you know what, we're not going to deal with it in the short term. We have things to do. We have deadlines. We'll deal with it later, but I can understand where that is coming from. Now, would you please give us some strategies on how to de-escalate situations, be it just a personal disagreement, if the other
Mhm.
person has raised their voice or are really getting worked up?
I think the first thing is to really try to understand what the upset person's issues really are first before trying to communicate anything. Our communication is always going to be more effective the more understanding that we have. So it's counterintuitive, though, to let somebody just keep yelling at you,
Of course.
especially if you think you can quickly, explain something away and they'll be fine. But once somebody's that worked up, if they're very worked up and angry and they need to give a speech about how, what it is you're doing that's upsetting them or whatever the situation is, it's much better to try to listen attentively without judgment. And we teach people also how to do deep breathing while they're doing that to calm themselves down. Because it's sort of like our animal brain gets really activated when we're angry. And it's like animals respond to how we say things, not what we say, right? So if you're trying to call your dog and you're going, come over here, you ugly, creepy, rotten, no good dog, come here. The dog will wag its tail and come on over.
Even
But
though
if
you
you,
use the words ugly and creepy.
yeah, but if you say, get over here, you beautiful dog, the dog's just gonna, take off.
Run
So
away.
when someone's angry, their animal brain is very alert to threat. So if we can lower our nervous system arousal with deep breathing, with a calm, non-judgmental kind expression on our face, like I'm interested in you, like you matter, your feelings matter. Sometimes even saying, well, what you're saying really matters. I want to hear you. I want to understand. That in saying that creates an atmosphere of safety for the other person. Because typically, underlying anger is a feeling of being threatened.
Right.
Right? So we want that animal brain to feel less threatened, right? To feel more comfortable with us. Now, if it's an interpersonal relationship, our heart's going, and we're probably feeling revved up and we want to yell back, or we feel misunderstood, or we feel mistreated in that moment and we want to defend ourselves. But if we can suppress that for a little bit, we can hold that back and think a little more strategically, like helping myself understand this person is going to help me negotiate and resolve this conflict later. And that's really true for even global conflicts. The better we understand an enemy, right? If we understand what they're thinking and what's motivating them and what their biggest fears are, diplomacy is going to be more effective. We're going to be able to find nonviolent solutions to problems if we actually understand our enemy better, really on a global, geopolitical level. So that is also true even if you're there's a great book by George Kohlreiser called Hostage at the Table, and he was a hostage negotiator.
Right.
And he talks about managing, using some of the same principles for hostage negotiations in the workplace when you're dealing with hostility from coworkers and bosses and things like that. That the same sort of rules of negotiation are applicable. And if they can work in a life and death situation when someone has a gun to your head, it could probably work in a typical workplace, right? When the stakes are high. And one of the first things hostage negotiators do is they talk in a really calm voice, and they'll say, hey, what can we do for you? Are you thirsty? Do you need a pizza? Can I bring you a Coke? What do you need? I'm here to help. They really try to establish a sense of just basic human trust, that I'm interested in what you want. I'm interested in understanding you. And it's very effective because at a core human level, we all want to feel, again, like we matter and like we're understood.
Right. So they don't come with, hey, we want that person. Give us the person back. This is what I want
Right.
first.
We don't
So
do
the
that. I mean,
win-win situation, sorry, Gina. The
no, you're
win-win
right.
situation is, let me establish first what it is that you need. And if I can provide it for you, let me hear you before I then tell you what I'm hoping that this deal is going to get me at the end. So I'm going to start with establishing how I can help you.
Yes, and the reason is also a selfish reason in that situation, because the more information we have, the more knowledge we have about what that person needs, the better our negotiation strategy is going to be. It's
Mm.
operating in the dark where you don't really have any idea what somebody wants, or you don't have any idea what's motivating that person. You're just sort of stabbing in the dark. You have no idea what to offer that might be a good bargaining chip for negotiation. And the
Right.
same thing in our close interpersonal relationships. A lot of times people look at the surface argument, like, I'm so sick of you, putting your shoes on the kitchen table. How many times have I told you that I hate it when you put shoes on the table? And the other person is defending themselves. I just forgot. I'm sorry. I was coming in. My hands were full. I'm going to clean it up. And now you're in a back and forth argument, right? But if you listen to the person, I'm so sick and tired of you putting your shoes. If the other person were to say, oh, that must be really frustrating to tell me over and over, and here I still did that. That must feel terrible. I'm so sorry
Mm.
you feel that way. I'm so sorry. I mean, how angry is that person going to need to stay about that thing, right? They feel heard, they feel understood, they feel cared about. So I tell people you can save hours of arguing pleasure by going straight to the emotional need. Some people need to argue, they like it. Um, but if you go straight to the emotional need that the person is expressing, and sometimes you don't always know it from the words they're using, because underneath that anger about the shoes on the table, there might be some other burden that person is carrying that they need to be able to talk about, right? And they're targeting the shoes as the object of their scorn when maybe there's something even more going on, right, underneath that. And unless we show an interest and we have an open mind and ask questions about what's going on, this must be upsetting, tell me about your day. Unless we show that interest, we might never even know that this person had a near miss on the freeway and they're really scared about something else. And then the last straw was the shoes on the table, and that just set them off, right? So
That would set off anyone for sure.
I don't like it. I wouldn't I wouldn't like it. But these are the things that people fight about when they live together.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Gina, any last words on how to de-escalate conflict, especially personally, and which will then translate into the workplace as well?
I think a big part of it is uh, slowing down your own nervous system reaction to the conflict before kind of calming and managing your own emotions first before you try to resolve a conflict with someone else. And the reason for that is you're just not going to be effective if you're really hot and the other person's really hot. And now you're both just flamethrowers, throwing heat at each other. So we teach people a lot of strategies like deep breathing, like telling yourself, I can handle this. I may not know what to say or do right now, but I can find a good solution to this problem. Kind of talking yourself through the ability to wait, to pause, to be patient, and not try to quickly resolve it when you're already really aroused nervous system wise. Your nervous system is really ramped up because when we are that ramped up in terms of our feeling upset emotionally, our our thinking becomes very narrow, and we're not creative in problem solving, and we're not very good at negotiating or thinking outside the box. And our thinking is very narrow and selfish and self-focused.
Back to
And
that defending myself again.
and we get so focused on ourselves that we miss important information that could help us negotiate if we're not calmer. You don't need to be super calm, but just calm enough to listen, calm enough to wait before you try to speak. And so we teach people actual calming strategies, deep breathing strategies, and different ways of thinking that that are more empowering, that make you feel like you're not a helpless victim of this angry person. That you have other tools available that you can employ when that person calms down. Those kind of tools are very, very helpful.
Absolutely. And may I ask you to tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yes, Frazzle Brain. So Frazzle Brain is available wherever books are sold. It is a self-help book for people who are trying to manage anxiety, anger, and stress. And I came up with the term frazzle brain because most people describe feeling frazzled these days. There's a lot of strife, and coming out of COVID, people are still quite stressed. And so frazzle brain is that state where you're feeling this sense of urgency, irritability, pressure, and your head is kind of foggy, and you just feel just a lot of distress. And so there's a lot in the neuropsychology research that teaches us really how to intentionally calm ourselves down and find peace and resolve some of these issues. So I invite people to read it. It is not sciency. It is written for everyday readers. You do not have to be a neuroscience geek to get the message from the book, and it's designed to be really user friendly, and people are really enjoying the calming relief they're getting from it. I'm getting nice feedback, so I appreciate that.
Awesome stuff from Frazzle Brain, a book authored by Gina Simmonds Schneider. Gina, thank you so much for sharing these strategies today with us of resolving conflict. Very, very helpful and much needed.
Thank you so much, Roberta. I really appreciate you having me on.
My absolute pleasure. And before you go, please tell us where we can find you on the socials and where to find the book as well.
You can find me at frazzlebrain.com, and all my social media links are there. You can find all of them. I'm on all of them pretty much. I'm not on TikTok, but um,
It's coming.
in LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Yes, but frazzlebrain.com is a one-stop place where you can read more about the book, and you can find my social media contacts. I also have a blog at Psychology Today called Frazzle Brain, and I write a lot about helpful tips on all kinds of psychology topics. So people can follow me there, and there are links there too on my website.
Excellent stuff. Frazzlebrain.com. Gina Simmonds Schneider, the psychotherapist who helps us de-escalate conflict and is a trainer, author as well. Thank you so much for being on our show. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Roberta. My pleasure.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.